So before we get started, let's take a look at an overview of a roll. A roll is made up of several different technical components that when we put them all together, gives us a nice, reliable, efficient roll. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the whole thing and give you the basics of what it is we actually do to roll our kayak up. We're also going to take a look at some different types of roll that we're going to learn and look at in these lessons. So, the two main types that we're going to focus on in this course is a C-to-C roll and what we call a sweep roll. Both very, very similar, but just a subtle difference between the two of them. You might also come across lots of other different types of rolling. The basics are very much the same, and feel free to adapt your method of rolling to work for you. So let's take a look at the whole roll and an overview of how it works.
Whichever way we choose to roll our kayak, the end goal remains the same. This is, from an upside down position, we're using our paddle and our body to bring the boat the right way up again, so that ultimately we're breathing air and we can carry on paddling. The two types of roll that we're looking at in this video are a C-to-C roll, and then also what we call a sweep roll. So let's take a little look at the key components of our roll. The setup position is where we start from by getting our blade and body in the right place before we capsize. It's worth remembering that we're just doing this when we're learning the roll, because if we do this in anger, perhaps because we've been knocked over by a wave, we're not always going to be starting in this position. But for learning, we're going to class the setup position as our body rotated, paddle parallel with the boat, and the front blade is facing up to the air. So once we capsize, we're going to keep our body and blade in that setup position. So still body rotated, paddle parallel with the side of the boat, and blade up on the surface of the water. From the setup position, we're going to move the paddle into a position that we can start to put pressure on the blade. This is what's going to help us roll the kayak up. Now this roll we can see here is a C-to-C roll. So Simon has brought the blade out to 90 degrees to his boat. He's going to start pulling down on the blade, and this is going to generate lift, which will allow him to roll the kayak up. Here we can see a demo of that C-to-C roll from above. Starting from that setup position, making sure we're still in that setup position when we're upside down before the blade comes out to 90 degrees, and we're pulling down on the paddle to generate lift. A sweep roll works in much the same way. So the same setup position, but this time we sweep the blade out to 90 degrees using a climbing blade angle. So sweeping the blade out helps to generate a little bit of lift, puts pressure through the blade, which when combined with a hip flick, which we'll talk about in a moment, will help roll the boat up the right way. So again here we can see the blade being swept out wide away from the boat with a climbing blade angle, generating lift. Check out our core skills lessons on climbing and diving blade angles if you haven't already. And the last important component that we're going to think about is a hip flick. So once the blade is out to 90 degrees for the C-to-C, or once we start sweeping the blade out to 90 degrees in our sweep roll, not only are we going to put pressure down through that active paddle, but we're going to start rolling the boat up using our knees, hips, and our core muscles. This roll up of the boat is fundamental to making sure our roll is successful. Don't worry if at the moment all of this information seems a little overwhelming. because we are going to break it down and go into each component in more detail in the coming lessons. So let's just summarise those key parts to the roll. We're going to start the roll from our setup position. We're then going to make sure that once we've capsized, we're still in that nice setup position with the blade up on the surface and our body rotated. We're then going to put pressure on the paddle, either by using a sweep or bringing it out to 90 degrees in a C to C roll before we start to pull and put pressure onto that blade. And then, as we're putting pressure on the blade, we're using this nice hip flick technique to roll the boat up. So the aim of this lesson was to just give you a general overview of the two types of roll that we're going to be looking at, the C to C and the sweep, and some of the key components. We will go into more detail on each of these rolls and look at how we learn it. When we're feeling happy, let's move on to the next lesson. For full access to the rolling course, go to onlineseakayaking.com.